Well, hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you for giving up your climate strike afternoon to come out here and talk about the oceans with us at the Aspen Institute. We really appreciate it. And hopefully you'll think of some of your favorite call and response chants, and afterwards maybe Sanjayan can lead us out into the streets. We'll take Pennsylvania Avenue back. So be thinking about that. We'll see how it goes, and if you're up for it, we'll get something going. But my name is Mike Conathan. I'm the executive director of the Aspen High Seas Initiative, and we're thrilled to have Ian Urbina and M. Sanjayan with us today for this conversation about Ian's remarkable, incredible book, The Outlaw Ocean. Our program at the Aspen Institute focuses on primarily the high seas, which is this area beyond national jurisdiction where pretty much anything goes. Outlaw is about the right way to describe it. And so Ian's done a tremendous job of capturing that, and really looking forward to hearing him discuss that project today. With us as well, we have Dr. M. Sanjayan, who's the CEO of Conservation International. And I want to take a minute to thank CI for co-sponsoring this event with us. They've taken care of the lunch for you all, so the vegetarian and vegan lunch for you all, appropriate again for Climate Strike Day. And also making sure that we could have books for all of you to take home. So thank them for that and for participating in this, as well as for Sanjayan's presence here with us today. So Sanjayan has been CEO of Conservation International for about 3 years now, he was telling me. And prior to that, he has run virtually every other aspect of what CI does and worked in the NGO space for a very long time. He's a scientist by trade, ran their oceans work, their science work, their development work, their communications work, and he's just a hero for the planet and a remarkable conservationist in his own right. And if you Google all of his late night talk show appearances, you'll see what that looks like. And of course, Ian and I have a bit of a relationship that goes back. We were at Georgetown together back in the early 90s, and actually our fathers were also at Georgetown together back in the late 60s. So it's this bizarre confluence. And of course, while Ian and his father were busy setting school records on the track and field team, my father and I were busy setting school records for time spent at the tombs. But that's only because we were waiters. We both worked there. That's clearly what the impetus was. And so now we're in careers where Ian is the pirate chasing, swashbuckling journalist that they're going to make movies about someday, and I'm the guy who sits in comfortable warm rooms and eats M&Ms on conference calls. But really what we're here to talk about today is Ian's incredible book and the ocean and what this means. And for me, as the director of an ocean program here at the Aspen Institute, we have, based on the platform and the reputation and the unique role that Aspen plays in the community, I think an opportunity with our program that we're building to really start to bring people together and have some of the hard conversations about these ocean issues, because a lot of them are, in a very positive way, they're beginning to be felt more around the world. We see images actually beginning to have an impact, and most prevalently we see that in the plastic space, where now the straw in the turtle's nose and the plastic bag at the bottom of the Mariana Trench are as famous as ocean imagery as anything else we can think of in the conservation world right now. And it's the remarkable thing about that is the way that it draws that connection. It draws people to a place that is the most remote and the most unexplored anywhere on the planet in a way that we've never been able to do before. And what I think is so remarkable about Ian's work and about this book is the approach that he took to the high seas, this world of the ocean that exists beyond any one nation's jurisdiction, that covers 2/3 of the ocean itself, 45% of the surface of the planet, and is virtually, as Ian puts it in the video, ungoverned and ungovernable. And the way that we're going to act to change that is by making the kinds of personal connections that we've made through that imagery to the plastic space, that we're making now through people's connections to climate change and what's happening around the world with extreme weather and these events that affect people personally. And the stories that Ian tells in this book make those kinds of personal connections. They put a human presence in this area of the planet that is entirely otherwise without humanity. And so I think that's the powerful message there. And as we look to move through that work here at the Aspen Institute, we want to bring people together to have those conversations, to think about, what are the real ways that we as a society are going to handle the problems that are facing the world's oceans and how we're going to move forward with those. So with that, I want to thank Ian and Sanjayan for being here. We're going to start our presentation today. We've got a brief video introduction that shows some of the incredible situations that Ian's been in throughout the course of writing this book. And then we'll move to a dialogue. Sanjayan and Ian will take the stage, and they'll have a conversation. And then as we get deeper into that, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask your questions as well as we move forward. So let's start the video, and then Sanjayan and Ian can come take over for us. Thank you.
I think of the ocean as this space that has been kind of a metaphor for freedom, and it still is that. You know, it is a place that people go to escape rules and escape government and escape other people because it's so expansive. But those very allures of the space are what has made the ocean a scary place. Don't take photos, don't take photos. So I put the camera down. Few places on the planet are as lawless as the high seas. The ocean is a place of amazing beauty, but it's also this dystopian realm where severe inhumanities occur, and often with impunity. Over. What you realize when you're in that void or in that expanse is that most of that space is ungoverned and ungovernable. There are few laws, and what laws exist are murky and overlapping and contradictory. Laws are only as good as their enforcement, and the enforcement mechanisms for any of the laws are anemic at best. You have human trafficking, sea slavery, abuse of stowaways, weapons trafficking. When the UN looked at it in 2009 and they interviewed Cambodian deckhands, over 50% of them had witnessed murder. A lot of the forced labor that end up on these fishing boats are trafficked migrants and are very poor and easily taken advantage of. One mariner summed it up as, this line of work is like jail with a salary, except the salary is not guaranteed. We in the West would like to think that things are progressively getting better, and in many ways they are, but in this space, things are arguably getting worse. Over 99% of crimes that occur out there go unreported. And there's not a huge point in reporting them because it's never clear who would actually do anything with that information. I think if there's anything to be learned about human nature from the Outlaw Ocean, it's that we all have this visceral capacity to behave in ways that we thought civilization had stamped out. There's a vanishingly thin line between civilization and the lack of it. And I think the exploration of this frontier is an attempt to look at how thin that line is and what's on the other side.
Thank you, everyone, for being out here for lunch with us. And I want to add one thing to the wonderful introduction that Mark gave. First of all, Mark, so glad to see you here at the Aspen Institute and leading the High Seas program. It is a terrific initiative that was launched this year, I believe. Yep, just last year. I'm also a fellow of the Aspen Institute. I'm a Cato fellow, so I have like a deep connection to this institution. So it's really nice to be in this incredible space as well. So, Ian, I'm going to start by telling you why we provided a free lunch. we're a nonprofit. So we provided this free lunch because in 2015, you wrote an article in the New York Times. It won a bunch of awards. It was an article that we read. And even for someone who spent their entire lives in conservation, I was born in Sri Lanka, I literally grew up on the sea. It was a revelation to me. I always thought I was doing the right thing when I would go out there and buy seafood that was, say, certified, MSC certification, the highest levels of certification you can find. And I would ask for those things when I would buy it. I would use the little checklist that different aquariums would give me to say, I will only eat this kind of fish. What I didn't realize was, even though those certifications, very useful as they are about ecological sustainability, they tell you nothing about the conditions in which the people who caught them had to experience life. It would be like the garment industry saying that it's sustainable cotton and 100% recycled rubber, still using slave labor. How big is the problem? And we'll start with how big is the problem, and did that surprise you as well?
Is this on? Yeah. First of all, thank you to CI, to Sanjayan, to Aspen for having this incredible event. So to take one step back from the question is to say, what is the problem? First, that I would be alluding to me, the problem is an out of sight, out of mind reality that results in an utter lack of governance in a sprawling space that for too long has been thought of as simply a space, sometimes a marine space, but rarely a workplace. So the problem, as I see it on a meta level, is a rethinking of that location and remembering of, as you allude to, the 50 plus million people that work out there. Now, the lack of governance and the lack of protections about the people who work above the waterline and the creatures below, I think is a huge problem on the most general level. The specific subgroup of the problem being human rights and labor abuses and how they feed from and result in environmental crimes, I think is, I don't know the right word to quantify it, but I think it is a huge problem, in part because it's so rarely discussed, and it's unlike many of the, you made this really smart reference to garment. You know, if you look historically at other key moments and key industries, blood diamonds, sweatshop garment, dolphin-free tuna, you can see there were key moments where there was a reckoning by that industry with the problem of, you know, child labor or environmental crime. And I think that moment is now arriving to the seafood industry and the maritime space generally. So step one is to have a sustained covering and exposure of, and step two is, I think, to start thinking about, CI, Aspen are already involved in it, solutions for.
Do you think it's possible, and what would it look like to develop social responsibility standards for seafood at large? Because you can't go into a restaurant today and look down and says, you know, this mackerel not brought to you by slave labor.
Right, right. Yeah, I think it's possible for sure. So again, to do what I always do, which is take a step back.
Well,
Yeah.
and who's against it?
Well, where I was headed is answering that. I think there's a, not to get too esoteric, but I do think there's a long cultural and intellectual history behind thinking of the sea and maritime as another world where things are different and there's an exceptionalism to it. And that exceptionalism fostered through literature and everything else is why if you walk up to a airline pilot and say, you of course have a crew manifest, right? And they say, of course. And you've registered where you're going, and they say, of course. But if you walk, and that's pre 9/11, that's cultural. If you walk up to a ship captain and say, you have a crew manifest and you've called ahead and you have everything mapped out and someone's going to know where you are at all times, they'd say, who are you? Um, and I think that's a cultural distinction that is really problematic in the first place. Who's against it? So that leads me to the culture of the industry is against it. The industry being fishing to a larger degree than, say, Maersk and commercial shipping. And those who oppose government or trans-government rules oversight are those who benefit from it, large retailers, large fishing companies, who say, look, we've never done it that way and we're not going to start now. And they have lots of regularized excuses as to why they shouldn't have to always have a transponder that says where they are, or have a uniform license plate that everyone uses around the world that makes that ship stuck in time and you can't change its identity month to month.
So just let me understand this correctly. So when you say large, retailers, these are things that we could go into a supermarket here and buy, for example, right? Cans of fish, for example, cans of tuna or other kinds of fish. But isn't that a huge risk for these companies if the word gets out that literally slave labor was used in putting this together?
Yeah, so it's a huge risk from a brand perspective. But there are two things that happen there. One is many of the players have no brand, right? So if I say to you Walmart, it's a name you know. If I say to you CP, it's probably not a name you know. But CP is actually hugely powerful in the aggregate buying of fish, and they sell to Walmart. So if I put a piece on the front page of the New York Times that says CP knowingly is involved in, and this is hypothetical, I'm not hitting CP, but knowingly is involved, I should, but involved with slave labor and IUU and environmental crimes, and is looking the other way, no one will care because no one's heard of CP and you can't really act on that. But if I look at Walmart and say Walmart is not actually telling its buying agents to force its sellers to clean up their supply chain and abide by a set of rules. And again, I'm not hitting Walmart. It's just a name that everyone knows, and it's a huge player. They have a real, or Nestle, who we hit in the original article, they have a real risk from a brand perspective.
But if there was a company that wanted to try to do the right thing, and let's pick Walmart because everyone knows it, is it actually possible for them to trace the fish that they have in their stores throughout the world back to one of these tiny boats? Because what you see is these almost ramshackle boats, almost sort of a little living village, kind of like with a real ecosystem. In your book, you talk about sort of the rats and the vermin and the conditions on these boats. They're sunk for almost no cost, and the owners don't actually care because they've already taken the profit and run away with them. Can you trace it all the way back to that?
So you make a great example of garment. So I worked on the Tazreen and disasters where many workers in Bangladesh were killed in garment factories. And went to Dhaka, went undercover and snuck in these factories, looking at a similar decentralized supply chain that's very difficult to manage. The dye is made here, the stuff is sewn there, it's shipped over here and bundled with other types of clothes and sold to these middlemen who then sell it to Benetton. And that's an on-land supply chain, but that's globalized and decentralized and often shifting based on a spot market. Dye is cheaper this week over there. So it is not easy. Now, so cleaning up a supply chain in the globalized moment is not an easy thing. It's not a cheap thing. It's not a fast thing. Now, take it offshore to spaceships that are on the planet, moving through a space that no one governs, that have a ship flagged to one country, captained by a guy from another country, manned by a crew from a third country in international waters and dropping off their cargo in a fourth country. And they're moving. Okay, and the countries where the stuff's getting dropped off has no inclination to mess with the cargo because they're just through. So it's not easy, I get it, but it is utterly feasible. And there are already movements afoot, port state control measure is an example, that are attempting to impose these rules. And a player like Walmart could accomplish huge improvements in supply chain monitoring.
And to be fair, I think we're working with them on exactly this problem around a couple of the big fisheries that they're involved in, with some progress. So, two quick questions. I really want to open up to the audience because, of course, we've got this amazing audience here. First question is, I was surprised at something that happened to me about a year ago when I was walking in a harbor in Hawaii with the head of our fisheries program. And he said there was a chain link fence, and there's a whole bunch of little fishing boats out there, not U.S. fishing boats from elsewhere. And he said, look at that boat, look at that boat, look at that boat. Those all have slave labor on it. And I said, that's unbelievable. Why can't we go out? Why can't we go out and arrest them?
We can.
We can.
I mean, in many cases, you can.
Can we really? So those boats they're not just docking in places like Myanmar. They're also docking in Hawaii.
Yeah, no, in fairness, it's not so easy. It's difficult to check on labor conditions on these vessels, much more so than checking on the documentation that pertains to the fish, partially because of the progress that's been made, helped by organizations like yours, in the environmental front, to impose tighter regulations on environmental concerns, and the lack of progress that has occurred on the labor front generally in all industries, but quite especially in this industry, and quite especially more with fishing boats, because there's this strange exceptionalism about. So many of the labor conventions that exist apply to seafarers, merchant marines, Maersk, container ships, and fishing is exempt. And has long since been exempt from many of those things. So for all of these reasons, it is difficult to get access to the boat and to do anything about the conditions.
And the second thing is something you mentioned. You said, why bother reporting it if no one can actually do anything about it? Sort of idea that came out on your film. But these boats are operating on the high seas, but many of them are also operating within the EEZs of the exclusive economic zone of small island nations. So you take a nation like Kiribati, tiny speck of an ocean country, but it's not one, it's a constellation of hundreds of islands. So when you put Kiribati's waters, exclusive waters together, it's big. It's like the biggest ocean nation around. It's the length of the United States. It's not just a high seas strict problem, right? It absolutely affects countries and their ability to manage their resources.
Yeah, you're exactly right on that. So 2 weeks ago, I got back from a patrol off the coast of the Gambia, and this was a patrol in which there were Gambian Navy and fisheries officers on board a vessel that was an outside organization. And we boarded and inspected, and ultimately they boarded, I was there, and inspected, ultimately arrested 3 vessels. These were Chinese flagged vessels with co-ownership with Gambian individuals. The ships were taken back to port, mostly foreign crew, Senegalese crew, Chinese captains, and then the interesting part happened, which is somewhat what you alluded to. Gambia is a poor country, smallest African nation on the continent, and is in desperate need of revenue. And who's investing in bridges and roads but the Chinese? And so while the fisheries officers and the head of the fisheries ministry was really excited about a legit arrest, all of a sudden everything ground to a halt because someone from upstairs, shall we say, in the government said, wait a minute, what are you doing here? Because they got a call. And in fairness to Gambia and whomever upstairs made the call, there's a balancing act always going on, and it's a high stakes one in these poor countries where there's a lot at issue and it's complicated. At the same time, it's a legitimate arrest over a serious crime. Some of them were labor abuses, some of them were fishing abuses. And this is how things get mired in the real world in these very places you're alluding to, often in national waters.
Okay, my last question, I'll turn it over to the audience, is so you spent 40 months on boats, 12,000 nautical miles, sailing up and down. Some of the video is very confrontational. The book reads like a a series of stories, and they all page turners. Was it dangerous, and what's the most sort of surprising thing you felt happened to you during those 40 months of voyaging?
So this
You
is
don't look like a pirate. And then when I watched that film, I was like, this is the mildest managed pirate I've ever seen. I really
maybe
expected
that's
a bit
my
more
protection.
swashbuckling.
Yeah, swashbuckling is not a term that's often thrown at me. Dangerous. So I always am a little uncomfortable with the danger question. It's a legitimate question, but the truth of the matter is the people that I was interviewing on these vessels, and also the people I brought with me, my translator, my fixer, my photographer, were often in-country folk, and those folk stayed when I left, and those folks don't carry American passports. And especially the folks I'm interviewing, they don't leave the ship when I leave. And you talk about real danger, both the staff that I bring with me and the folks I'm talking to, those folks face real danger just in survival, but also in being associated with me in any way. So it always feels a little gross for me to touch the danger question. That said, yes, there were situations that I didn't want to tell my family about when I got back or when they were happening. They usually involved people that were not happy with the questions I was asking. I think among those, the one that scared me the most was Somalia. In reporting for the book, we got sort of invited in, intending to do one story to Somalia and then to Puntland, which is, as you know, the horn of Somalia and Africa, near off, facing Yemen, to this breakaway state, really lawless state. And we thought we had everything set up when we rolled in. And then things went south very quickly. We lost favor with the government. We had half of our security detail pulled from us, and we were told to get out. But there's no way out. You can't travel by road, ISIS and Shabab. And planes weren't coming for 4 or 5 days. And so we were in a really bad situation, hiding out on the roof of a compound for a couple of days, trying to figure out what we were going to do to get out. Obviously, we got out fine, but I was genuinely scared in that incident.
So my only rule is please make it a question. I've been trying to do the same. So please ask a question if you'd like. And wow, lots of people. So I'll just start. I'll come back to the front. Let's just start at the back because the mic is there and we'll sort of slowly wake out. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Ariana Sutton-Greer from University of Maryland. My question is, I didn't see it in the video, can't wait to read the book, but can you make the link for me on how the human atrocities are also leading to environmental degradation and what that key is?
I'll try to do it concisely and give you two. It's a really good question. Give you two examples. One is with the environmental feeding into the human rights, and the other is the other way around. So environmental feeding into human rights. The fast short version is you have this situation globally where you have overfishing and illegal fishing, but I'm really fixated on overfishing, licensed, industrial, allowed fishing that is combing the nearshore stocks clean. And therefore, the industrial players and the local artisanal players are having to go so much further out from shore to catch a bare minimum to break even. It's already a low margin line of work and gets much lower the further out you go because fuel is the most important variable cost-wise. And so you start having this dark incentivization, is that a word, to find savings in other ways. And that is where you start having captains say, I'm going to use migrant workers and not pay them, because otherwise I can't make this work. And none of the locals want to stay on a ship that's headed from Songkhla, Thailand to Somalia. They just don't. So that's environmental feeding to human rights. Other direction, shark finning. So the problem and practice of catching sharks, throwing their bodies back but cutting their fins off, mostly for shark fin soup. Big problem, obliterating the shark population. So there's an interesting economic sub-story there in which you have, and I've seen this actually written into formalized contracts, labor contracts, where you have, say, a Taiwanese tuna longliner. Let's say it's leaving from Cape Town and it's going to, Montevideo. Okay, and it's fishing that patch. It's using a manning agent in Singapore, a company that recruits the guys. It's 30 crew of Filipino villagers, small guys, maybe most of them haven't even been to sea before. Their contract through their manning agent has ridiculously low wages. But it also has a clause written in it that says you can supplement your wages with side work. Okay, side work is shark finning. And what that means is you get on the vessel, and when that tuna longliner pulls in sharks, you cut off the fin, you throw the shark over, and you put the fin in a bag. Then when you get back to shore, those 30 Filipino workers get to sell those shark fins on the black market and subsidize their slave wages. Okay, this is an economic driver of the obliteration of a species, right? And it's partially funneled by the sort of collateral damage of slave wages. So that's the other direction.
So social despair really subsidizes these fishing boats to fish to the bottom, and so creates the ecological collapse that you see. You may not be able to do it unless you were using really bad labor practices. Right.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me. As a fellow journalist, if I can get a little meta, can you describe your approach or technique? Did you approach captains? Did you approach shipping companies? How did you get on these vessels, and talk a little bit about
And
technique?
can you introduce yourself to just
Steve Goldstein, formerly with the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Great paper. So, is there any paper that doesn't fit that category? So, the answer to the question varies per story, right? So, how did we go about finding this stowaway who had this incredible experience and was put on a raft in the middle of the ocean and washed up in Liberia? Was a very different story that couldn't have happened 30 years ago, but for the nature of Facebook and online realities and being able to find someone who's homeless but has a phone and has a Facebook page. But I think the real answer to your question is the sea slavery story and sort of how do you get there. So that has a very specific answer. The goal was to get on a specific subset of ships. These were the transshipment ships. Those are the ships that go really far away and often the fishing vessels stay out at sea for long periods of time, sometimes over a year. And they unload their catch onto a mothership and they are resupplied with ice, fuel, drugs, everything by motherships. Okay, but they stay out there, and that's the cost thing I was talking about before. That's how they can make ends meet, by staying out there and not coming all the way back in. But the mothership goes out and comes back. We want to get on those ships because what we had heard, we being the photographer and I, was that if you really want to tell the sea slavery story, you got to get on that group of ships because that's where it's the worst. But how do you get on them? They're 250 miles out from shore, sometimes further. This was a time we wanted to go to the South China Sea because there was a lot of attention on Thailand and those waters, although the problem is not distinct there. New Zealand, Falkland Islands, you can find the same stuff. So we went to Songkhla, Thailand, because it was a port where we knew lots of these vessels were leaving from. We sort of quietly set up camp in the town, and we tried to keep a somewhat low profile because we stuck out like sore thumbs, and there was a lot of awareness that the U.S. State Department and its TIP report, Trafficking in Persons report, was all over them, about to downgrade Thailand for its trafficking problems, and Human Rights Watch and a bunch of different players, The Guardian, others had been doing great work on highlighting these concerns. So we knew that we were going to be watched. But our goal was to go to Songkhla and ideally get on a vessel to take us all the way out. That very quickly became apparent. You go out for drinks and dinner and bro it up with these captains, and sort of, on the one hand, you're trying to just show them that you're to some you're a trustworthy, pretty transparent guy. You can't at the times, and most tier 1 venues, you can't lie about who you are. You can't mislead, and so you gotta be pretty straight about what you're up to. But in describing what I wanted to do, I didn't say, hey, Captain, I want to talk about sea slavery. I said, hey, I want to talk about the people who work out there and the challenges that they face, that you face, and what life and work is like on these ships. But I got to get out to these certain ships. Would you take me? No, 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 no. So a week and a half in of running into that, we realized we got to try a different tactic. So we began seeing if we could get captains to take us 50 out and hopscotch our way all the way out. So we at the times in most places, you can pay for transport, you can't pay for information. So if I convinced Sanjayan as the captain to take me out, and I paid him for that to cover fuel and whatnot, then I can't quote him or tell his story. It's fine. But we would convince the captain to take us 50 out, and then also as part of the deal, talk our way onto the next vessel. Calls up another captain, says, we've got these oddball guys who want to get on your ship and they want to take pictures. You willing to play ball? They won't report about you, and you can set down ground rules on them. But they also just want you to take 50 more out. And so that's kind of what we did, zigzagging out to 250 or so. Took a long time, couple of days spent, weeks spent getting halfway out and then coming back. And our translator got super young with it. Like, look at these guys. This is the right ship. This is the right demographics. I can tell those guys are Cambodian. Those guys are Thai. This is the right kind of ship. They're using the right type of gear. If we can get on this ship and we can stay, this is the story. So we got our captain to talk our way on there. That guy took a risk on us. He laid down ground rules. Don't photograph me. I tell you, get out of the way, get out of the way. I don't like something you're doing. I can tell you to stop. Other than that, you're good. And so on we went, and that's the story we told.
How long were you on that boat?
That was 3 days.
Where did you sleep?
That's an unpleasant recollection. So there's a part in the book where I talk about rats running across us. That's where we learned that hard lesson. So on most of these ships, there's a section in the back. There were 40 Cambodian crew, some as young as 13, most of them in their late teens, early 20s. And there rarely was downtime, but at this one point, we were 35 hours in of no sleep, and the translator was still really sick, and the photographer was like blurry-eyed, and we thought we got to lay down for a little while. So we were trying to figure out where we would do that. We went to the back of the ship, and there's this sort of cavern, and it's like that scene in a sci-fi movie where the character discovers the nest, and there's all these cocoons, and you're like, oh, this is... And that's what it looked like. It was a sort of 3-quarter ceiling, maybe 3 feet, 4 feet tall. There are pictures of it. And all the boys and men were in nets converted into hammocks. And they were all hanging from the cocoon, like hanging from the ceiling in rows, all the way back in. It smelled horrible, cramped. About this much space between them and the floor. And I thought, okay, well, this is where they're sleeping. This is where we should sleep. And so I remember thinking and saying something to Adam, the photographer, what's the point in sleeping in a hammock when you're only like this far off the ground? Yeah, I've heard that, yeah. Now I know. I'll never ask that question again. But so we tucked in under there, slept for 20 minutes, and then we were woken up by the answer to the question, which is rats don't bother people in hammocks, but they do run the floor when they have the ability. So.
Wow. Question up front here. Yes, sorry, hang on one second.
Hi, thank you. Going back to how you opened the program and talking about labeling. So I had understood that a lot of fish is not what we think it is, that whether it's on retail or going into restaurants, that fish is often misrepresented and sold as something that it's not, and that there's a real problem with just even tracking to see what the fish is.
Yes. Yeah, counterfeit is a big problem. I bet you have much
Well,
more
yes,
knowledge.
it's a big problem. That said, some of the better labeling schemes that you have, like MSC certification, you'll see that, they do really certify that stock. And typically, it's a pretty good certification system that operates. So I don't want any of you leaving here thinking I shouldn't worry about certification. I shouldn't ask for MSC certified seafood in the better restaurant you eat at. Some airline like Air New Zealand only serves MSC certified fish. I think the one big point to make is that if you think you're buying a certain kind of fish, it's not always the same. And the second point is that even those best certifications currently do not include the human cost. So that just needs to be added on.
And just to bolster what you're saying, I do think that certification in many ways is the way of the future, and there is real interesting, promising things happening in the certification sphere. So Monterey Bay Aquarium, for example, has in the last year and a half begun creating a report card that takes into account the human condition. So it's happening.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Augustus Alzona, Filipino by birth, American by choice. My question is this: in terms of your direct experiences and those of your trusted associates over the years in pursuit of your agenda cause, have you found an increase in the amount of danger from state actors versus non-state actors? You know, the traditional pirates versus the government-sponsored terrorists, whatever you want to call them. And the follow-up to that is, what involvement, if any, do you think the United States military could have in helping your cause or assisting, or at least not getting in the way?
So on the state versus non-state actors, I think that non-state actors have always been more prevalent in this space. If you look through history, there's a robust tradition of, buccaneers and mercenaries and, illegal whalers and dumpers and, all these players that I chronicle and attempt to bring into the present have been there for a long time, to some degree more robust than state actors. So I don't personally think that that has shifted too much. Your second question, I think there's a lot that governments in general, not just the US government, can do, ranging from, there are already these ride-alongs that occur where the US Coast Guard, for example, puts its officers on foreign vessels, allied countries typically, and train those countries in boarding procedure and inspection procedure and the like. Often those have been motivated historically by drug concerns, anti-drug enforcement, and anti-terrorism enforcement. In my dream world, there would be a desire to broaden that inspection agenda out to include other types of illegality. Why should carrying cocaine be worse than carrying a slave, right, as a crime and as something we're concerned about? So not an easy thing to get into policy, but I think that those ride-alongs could be broadened out. But it's also important to think of the US government and even just the US military in other ways. So Uncle Sam, the US government, is a major buyer of stuff, huge buyer. In some markets, bigger than Walmart, right? And so as a buyer of things, it can sway the market. So if the DoD, Department of Defense, decided tomorrow that at all the military bases and their commissars, it's only going to buy tuna that is certified in XY way, that would send a ripple through the market as a buyer. And too infrequently do advocates think of the government in these other capacities and other leverage methods that they could use to affect policy. They just think of Senator so-and-so needs to write a law that says such and such. Well, there are other ways to do it.
It's a great idea. I'll mention that 2 years ago, actually at the beginning of the current administration, the U.S. Transferred a sort of retired 80-foot cutter to Costa Rica, along with helicopter and air support. Granger pushed that through, and one of the reasons for that was the drug trade and the immigration issues around Costa Rica. But I know firsthand the Costa Ricans really needed that boat to protect Cocos Island, which is way out there. They have one boat that can go there and basically do a circle and have to come back. And it's too far away to protect. It's a huge marine protected area, great aggregation for sharks. So it does happen, and it should continue to happen. Julia.
Hi there, Juliet Eilprin with the Washington Post, and thanks for, of course, all the great work that you do. You mentioned, again, at the outset, which of course all journalists know, that we go and we report these stories, and it's really the people we talk to who face the greatest risks. Do you stay in touch through WhatsApp or Facebook with some of these folks, and do you have a sense of whether some of them had their lives improved or gotten worse since you spent time with them? Thanks.
It's great to meet you, air quotes, and your book on sharks is amazing. Yeah, I keep in touch with too many of them. They keep in touch with me too much. And that's a challenge that I think all journalists face, of how to handle those relationships. I think that there are some isolated individuals that I kept tabs on more than others. So in the original series, there was Lang Long, who was this Cambodian man who had been shackled by the neck and experienced the kind of textbook slavery experience, but in a more dramatic, acute, newspaper-worthy form. And he was a pretty broken individual, and is not the type, nor did he speak English, but through someone in the Thai government who took a real interest, I kept real close tabs on him. At one point, soon after the piece came out in the Times, he disappeared, and I got approached by someone in a crowd like this from the State Department who said, "Hey, have you heard from Lang Long in a while? Because I'm hearing that he's been picked up, and we're not sure where he is." And that began a whole scramble that I think I describe in the book. So yeah, I do. And Lang Long is someone who I think I can humbly say had his life improved by the reporting. I think the thing that keeps me up at night are all the people that I don't keep in touch with, and the people whose stories I use. And I find myself wondering, did I maybe make things worse for them? I'll never know. That scares me a little bit. Yeah, I do try to. It's a challenge. This is more answer than you want, but I'm in a situation with this fleet called the Somali 7, where I'm struggling to put it down because I keep getting new tips every month that the same 40 Cambodian guys are now stuck in Iran, and I feel myself like I have to keep on that, but it becomes an infinite regress.
Two more quick questions. Yes, at the back.
Mike Gravitz, Marine Conservation Institute. Oh, sorry, Mike Gravitz, Marine Conservation Institute. Ian, 3 or 4 years ago, the United States Congress ratified the Port States Measures Agreement with an implementing piece of legislation. And shortly thereafter, a number of other countries, enough countries to make the treaty actually go into effect, signed on. Have you noticed any changes in the level of illegal fishing that's been going on since the Port States Measure Agreement really went into international force?
This is one of those questions where I think the questioner probably knows more of the answer
No, I
than.
don't.
No,
No,
and that's not a critique.
not a
Mike.
rhetorical
No.
question.
I
don't
honestly
know.
would probably call you and others in the room before I would try to answer that question.
Okay.
I'm not watching. I don't even know how you would watch this, because while on the one hand, I think there's Julie and others like preceding the bout of coverage that occurred in the last 5 years, there's been a real uptick in general of watchfulness on IUU issues. So that makes it look like there's more happening. There may just be more reporting. On the other hand, I think some of these major policy responses have to be having an impact from what I can intuit. Oh yeah, good luck with that, yeah. Talk to the Washington Post.
Quick question.
Yeah, Khaki Flynn, and so I'm so loud. I think I get quieter with microphones. So I've met you both. I met you at Singularity University at NASA Ames, and then Ian through the Ocean World. So I just want to put this in perspective. So here's my question for all y'all. How many of you have worked on a fishing boat or been out on the ocean or even ocean people? And it's okay if you're not, I'm just curious, that's all, right? And so so I met Ian, I emailed him, I think a year ago. And I've had a conversation like he did with my mom, that I didn't want to tell her about the things that happened on the ships. So 6 months ago, I started working as a marine observer. I want to put this in as crystal clear perspective in people's minds as I can. I was in Virginia friggin' Beach. How far is Virginia Beach from the Pentagon, which should be the safest place in the world and in the United States? Is it 200 miles? So I'm 200 miles from the freaking Pentagon. I'm on a ship as a marine observer. I'm vetted through the Coast Guard, all kinds of vetting on a ship that's supposed to be vetted. And I won't go into all the details of things that happen, but I'll just say that I've had scary conversations. I finally broke down and told my family like the things that happen on those ships. This isn't American waters. I'm 7 miles offshore. All right? 7 miles offshore. These are men with Coast Guard marine merchant credentials. I had just
if I don't mind, let me just translate that into a little question
Yeah.
for you. Did you run? It's any part of your story cover what's happening in the United States in terms of fisheries?
Yeah, and it was it's just to put it in perspective for people. Like there is the issue with
it's not a problem that is just in the far side of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the first of all, and that like I even call you guys know Roberta Kaplan, pretty famous lawyer.
Sorry, ma'am. I just want to keep this.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
That's my job
I'm just
here.
trying to support, like,
Fair enough.
support Ian, like
Absolutely.
where the problems are coming from.
I hear the point
If you
you're
solve the culture problems, you'll solve the fish problems, right?
No, I appreciate Kaki. I didn't focus on U.S. waters. The AP did some really great work within the last year and a half on those waters and how these very labor abuses contaminate even our ships. I do think it's important to put it in perspective, and I wanted to focus on places where there was a lot less attention and where I think the problems are more pervasive and acute. None of that is to say that they don't exist on our vessels, but I didn't look at U.S. waters.
Ian, on behalf of the Aspen Institute, this great audience, Conservation International, and just to sort of, our focus on the oceans is really 3 areas. One is massively increasing the amount of marine protected areas in the world. We have a goal of about 18 million new square kilometers of marine protected areas that we want to create and or manage in a better way. 20 key fisheries and aquaculture systems we've identified. The Western Pacific tuna being one of them. This is the last buffalo of the sea. I mean, they run in numbers that are unbelievable, in the billion. And we should be able to manage that sustainably. If we can't do that, we couldn't do anything. And the third is blue carbon, which is carbon that mangroves and coastal systems hold, which really could be the silver bullet for the planet. So on behalf of the work we do, this audience is a phenomenal book. Please get it. Please read it. Tell everyone about it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.